books have taken, I should be producing them roughly once a year. And I told them at the time when I signed the contract, I said, look, I would prefer 18 months. And they said, well, you know, for accounting purposes, it's better if we do it on a yearly basis. Can we not just say every year, but if you need the extra 6 months, that's fine. And I went, yeah, right, that's fine. So that worked quite well until the one book that I was writing, where I suddenly found myself consulting for the games industry. And that's a really exciting and strange thing, but it's also very time consuming. And I spent a lot, I was about a year and a half of my life when I lived in hotels and airports and got no writing done, that was the thing. So this book got delayed and delayed and delayed. It was just 3 years coming out in the end. And just you know, that stage of my life finished, and I went, oh, okay, I'll get the next one down really fast. And then my wife rang me and said, I was still in Germany tying up one of the games, and my wife rang me and said, I'm pregnant. And it's like, shit. Well, no, I mean, I was kind of glad, but you know, it wasn't that much of a surprise. But the problem was, again, you know, I'm sure any of you who've got kids or will know that first sort of year after they're born, your life is just in pieces. So there was another massive delay, and so each of the last 2 books I've written have each taken 3 years, which puts me enormously behind schedule. And I've promised that I will get them out a bit faster now. But they, to be honest with you, they're a brilliant publishing house, guys. They're really, really good. They've never, you know, occasionally they've sort of gone, you know, but they've never, well, and the problem is my editor, when I first met him, the first lunch that we ever had together, he said, remember, Richard, we would always rather have a better book late. And I went, okay, that's great. And I'm sure he now curses the day he ever said that to me. Because you know, is it going to be late? Yeah, but it'll be better. The
later the better.
The later the better for me. But anyway, no, sorry, that was a bit of a detour. But basically, I've never been asked for an outline. And on the one hand, that might perhaps be a good thing. On the other hand, maybe not, because I think if I were forced to create the outline, maybe I would be a bit more disciplined in my work. On the other hand, I think it's interesting what Paul said, that you create the outline and then you don't use it anyway. So I kind of, there do seem to be 2 kinds of writers in the world. There are the writers that make sweeping generalizations, and then there are the ones that don't. Sorry, all joke. I think there are 2 kinds of writers in the world. There seem to be the ones who are very methodical and sit down and say, right, this is going to be a detective story about this, and this is what's going to happen, and at the end this will be the case, and you know, and then they just sit down and they type that out. You know, Agatha Christie was one of those. You know, she didn't put a word on the page until she knew exactly what was going to happen in the whole book. And there are a lot of writers who are like that, not just in the crime genre, but generally. Then there are the other kinds of writers that I find unlike, where they don't really have much sense of where they're going with an idea. They just kind of roll it around a bit. I mean, Jim Crace, I don't know if anyone has read anything by Jim Crace. He's a mainstream literary writer. And he always basically, he has said numerous times, the book is never anything like the thing that I started out trying to write. And this seems to, it's not something to do with genre or a kind of form of literature, because it seems to apply to everybody, no matter what kind of thing they're writing. Some crime writers write like that, some crime writers write the other way, some science fiction writers write like that, some the other way. And my problem is that whenever I've tried to really plan a book, it's incredibly dull. Because for me, the reason I write, well, now I write because I have to pay the rent, but for me, writing was always, I wrote because I wanted to read the story I was writing. And if the story I'm writing is not going to surprise me, then I'm not going to enjoy it. So if I know what's coming for the next 400 pages, it's going to be so tedious just to type it out. So what I like about the way I write is that I don't know where the story is going, and that's what enthuses me. And most of the really cool things that happen in my books happen because I've written myself into a corner, and how am I going to get out of this? I have to find some way to fix this. And the fixing is really where the good twists come in. It's where the most inventive science fiction comes in. Most of the really cool science fiction, or tools that I've come up with have been as a result of finding myself stuck. And how am I going to get the narrative moving again? How do I get it out of the mud? Well, we'll have an innovation or something that does X, and away you go with that. And again, characters, as Paul said, I find very often that a minor character, you become interested in that character, and you see that you can do a lot more with that character, and so you'll roll with that. And then, of course, the narrative rolls with that as well. I liken it to sailing. It's like you start out and you think, right, well, I'm going over there, but I know because I'm sailing I have to tack with the wind. I can't just go straight, I don't have an engine, I have to tack. And then once you're out there, you find that the weather can get quite rough, and you'll find yourself tacked off course. So you'll end up more or less over there, but it might be there rather than there.
So do you have an idea of an ending?
Oddly enough, I usually do. Yeah. The ending is usually
important.
Yeah. Well, especially because I think because
it means you finish when you reached it. This is kind of
yes, that is true. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
And it's like one of those things you do as a kid with the maze where you have to find your way through. You're like, this is where I have to get to, and how am I going to pick my way through that? But I'd say it's true that increasingly publishers are, and it's interesting. When I went to do the games work, obviously they are much more product oriented, and so for them that was no good to them at all. They had to have a sketch, an outline, So I can do it if you put a gun to my head, I can do it. It's just I find that what I write is less interesting.
It's different as a work in itself, is it different? It's different if you have, let's say, freedom of creation and
yeah, I think if you have the freedom to do something with it, then you are on a voyage of discovery, and obviously you've got a much better chance of surprising your readers if you've surprised yourself. People go, I had no idea that she was going to do that, and you say, yeah, well, you know what? Nor did I. I only knew by chapter 5 that was going to happen. Chapter 3, I had no clue. So these things emerge from the text, and they're as much a surprise to me as they are to the reader. And I do find with stuff that's been written methodically, that very often it is very easy to predict. You're kind of reading and you're going, especially crime novels. I mean, one of the reasons, I used to read a lot of crime, and I read a lot less now, and one of the reasons is because you kind of, once you've read enough of it, you start to have an intuition for how the stories will go. Yeah. And you're kind of reading it and you're going, it's him, it's that guy. I don't know why or how, but it's that guy. And yeah, sure enough. Because
I've written crime novels, and the problem with writing crime novels is that you as the author know what the crime is, whereas the detective is coming in at the end. But you know the backstory. You kind of have to know the backstory. Well, you don't. Sometimes you don't.
To write a good one, I think.
But to write a good one, you need to know everything, why that person's been found dead there, in that way. And this is the thing that the detective comes on with, and the detective is working backwards through the stuff you already know. But the thing to do is you're basically withholding information in plain sight. That's the trick. And I found that quite useful in science fiction, actually, to withhold it in plain sight. Saying that you didn't know that the character was going to do that, or you didn't know, actually in science fiction, increasingly you didn't know the character isn't who they said they were or who they think they were quite often now. Because there's quite a lot of these games being played with identity. I think it's one of the big themes that's emerging. It's one of the things that Philip K. Dick latched onto in the 1960s and 70s, but the science fiction, and actually mainstream literature as well, the unreliable narrator who's unreliable even to himself or herself, doesn't know anything. Thinks they're one person, but is in fact somebody else. Is one of the emerging themes. Maybe because we're so worried about companies and the state knowing everything about us, there's a kind of relief in knowing about there are people who don't know, who think they know who they are, but aren't who they are. Like the film Memento is a good example as well.
Angel Heart.
Yeah, Angel Heart. Yeah. And you need to know what that secret identity is as a writer, I think, really. It can come as a surprise, then you can sort of backtrack, but it's kind of interesting when you realise, oh, I am writing about one of those characters, but you need to sort of work it out. So I think, one of the tricks is when you're going back, I don't know how much you revise, I revise an awful lot, is going back over and working out what information I'm going to reveal here and what I'm not going to reveal. And hoping, you know, that the reader's not going to guess, you've done your job properly, and they're not going to guess what you're up to in a way, because that kind of spoils it, as you say, to the reader when you're reading a crime novel and you kind of guess halfway through. My partner really hates it when she loves watching crime series on TV. She hates me because I have to write notes and I say, okay, you know, that's the end. That character is actually a man or a woman, and so on, you know. Yeah.
What about this?
Bruce Willis is dead.
Oh, that was good.
Sorry, yeah. I'm not saying which film, but there's a film where Bruce Willis is dead all the way through. I got that in 2 minutes. It's really embarrassing.
What was it triggered? How did you work that one out?
What was it triggered it? Because he wasn't looking anybody in the eye.
Oh, right, because it's funny, because my wife is Spanish, and do we all know which film we're talking about, do we? Just right. Spoilers!
Yeah.
Now there are 2 movies in which Bruce Willis is dead through and through.
Oh, right.
The other one is Sin City 2, which I strongly advise you to only watch once.
All right, okay, so I'll avoid that. No, it was interesting because my wife is Spanish, and again, very shortly into that movie, she suddenly goes, he's not touching anybody. You know, now if you're British, that's no big deal, you know? But if you're Spanish, it's like you put a hand on the shoulder, you can take someone's hand. There's this sort of physicality to the way that the Spanish behave. And she goes, he's not touching anyone. He's not. And I watch and I go, you're absolutely, and he's a ghost.
He was also wearing the same clothes when he took off when he was shot.
Yeah, well, once you start, it's one of those things, once
you
pull the thread in.
Yeah, it's this way he wasn't interacting with the other characters. It's very cleverly done.
Well, what's good about it though is that it's a movie that stands up even when you know it, because it's a different viewing experience. But you know, you still enjoy it, but you enjoy it in a completely different way. Same with Shutter Island, actually.
Yeah.
Got a very similar dynamic.
You sound like very, very specialist viewers, film viewers. Very detailed, respective.
Well, I mean, it can be. I mean,
Special.
well, it's kind of interesting from a technical point of view to take things. And actually, it's more interesting to do with films and books. So I'd rather enjoy a book as itself as a book, but a film is something to be deconstructed rather than watching it. But I actually also write about films. I just published a book about film Brazil. So Terry Gilliam's Brazil, not country Brazil. Which is an interesting exercise in deconstructing the story and then trying to figure out if it made sense, which actually doesn't.
No.
Still, okay.
But I think the other thing is also, it's an interesting contrast to two media, because the whole point about